and we are not alone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Contact TV. I am your host, Leslie Mitchell Clark, and here is our other host, Mr. Wes Roberts. Good evening, Wes.
Good evening, Leslie. Got the hair happening today, folks, so if you don't like it, well, there's nothing you can do.
That's right. It's sort of biblical. I think it's good. It's good. Anyway, we are really excited because we are welcoming back to the program one of our very favorite guests, the Reverend John Polk. And John Polk is not only a lifelong experiencer, but he's an international metaphysical minister. He's the co-host of AquarianRadio.com. He's a Reiki master and teacher, a channel, a medium, a telekinesis practitioner, founder of Wolf Spirit Ministries, and he is also a consultant for the late, great Dr. Edgar Mitchell's FREE, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, which can be reached through www.experiencer.org. So we are very honored to welcome John Polk with this evening, and we're also going to be talking about his recent book. I can't wait to get into that. Yahweh, the Biblical God, is an Alien. Now, if that doesn't irritate the folks below the Mason-Dixon line, I don't know what will, Reverend John.
That was the whole intention. I'm controversial to provoke attention.
Glad to hear it.
And it's working, that's for sure.
So, Wes, would you like to start things off with a few questions here for the Reverend?
Absolutely. We were talking earlier, off camera, so to speak, about the whole experiencer reality. I don't want to call it a notion because we're both living it. So we were talking about the experiencer reality, and one of the things that really struck me was that something you said on the phone to me, and then something that I have noticed and Leslie has noticed as well, and that is the vast majority of these experiences are positive.
Yes.
So maybe, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, whether or not you want to weave in one of your experiences, or just say that you've seen very few negative experiences. How would you handle that one?
Let's take a few steps backwards. You mentioned Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Free Foundation, and we had talked earlier about one of the co-founders, Ray Hernandez. Well, the way that I actually came into contact with Leslie is through Ray Hernandez. Ray gave me a short list of prospects to get on the therapist list. The whole intention was so that people can go to experiencer.org, and regardless of where they may live in the country, North America, Canada in your case, or the world, they can possibly find a regression hypnosis therapist who's licensed and works not necessarily exclusively with experiencers, but has years and years of experience with experiencers. It makes a 100% difference. Yeah. There's really no point in going to a therapist who hasn't worked with an experiencer if you are an experiencer. They have come out with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation, the Foundational Encounters, has done the most comprehensive, cohesive, and longitudinal study in world history that deals specifically with experiencers. Anyway, Brad Olson said something that was very profound that I've known for years, but sometimes you have to hear something a few times before it really soaks in. And he says, do you realize how many higher ascended extraterrestrials are monitoring and observing us right now as we speak on this exact radio program? And I said, yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. I know that they're always there. You can't always see them, but they are always there. They're just vibrating at a higher frequency, and we can't necessarily see them with the naked eye, but they are always there. And I can feel them. You know, I can receive downloads and information from them, just like most of us can. And often the voices in our head, they're not always ours. Often they originate from another conscious being that we have some kind of resonance with, some kind of congruent frequency where we're compatible, and it's easy for them to communicate with us. And then once they know that we can receive downloads from them, they love it, they enjoy it. And it makes them want to give us even more information because now they know that we collectively have achieved contact.
Yes, indeed. And don't you think, Reverend John, that the evolved beings of the galaxy and beyond are primarily telepathic beings? Certainly they can physically talk if they wish to, some of them, but the idea that telepathy is really the mode of communication that is common to, all evolved beings. And therefore, the idea that, in disclosure, that we're going to have a being come down and start, speaking to us physically in English, which could certainly happen. They're capable of doing that. Some beings it certainly would happen. But we're having complete communication right now through individuals like yourself, through individuals like Daryl Anka, even Grant Cameron, people who are able to communicate telepathically and channel and accept downloaded information.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Grant Cameron. I had the pleasure of meeting him at the Experiencer Speak conference last year, August 28th and August 29th, where I was the opening speaker. And Audrey Starborn Hewins, who founded Starborn Support International, she lives up in Portland, Maine. That's where the conference always is. She's known Grant for a long time and got him to become one of the speakers. And I learned so much from Grant, but the one thing that I did know, but he explained it better than I'd ever heard it presented before, is that yes, time travel is possible by shooting gases out the back of a steel rocket engine. But that's what the primitive extraterrestrials are doing for space-time travel. Going close to 186,000 miles per second, which is the speed of light. You approach the speed of light, and the clicks on your clock start to change, right? But what he said is that if we can embrace the concept of one, the universal God consciousness spirit, and tap into that, that can be used as a form of propulsion. And it's not even propulsion. It's a method of traveling through a womb of transportation and transformation. So he said, yeah, you can shoot gases out the backside of a rocket and be propelled forward, but the higher ascended ETs, they're doing it through ESP and consciousness.
Yes.
They're not using, fossil fuels or, helium-3, which you can find on the moon or anything like that. I mean, they do need it and they do use it, but for the advanced time travelers, they're using consciousness. And it's not even a form of propulsion. It's a method of transportation. And when I heard that, I was like, wow, man, that put it all together for me. That made so much sense.
Well, I know that there are some experiencers that I've had the pleasure to work with who have communicated with beings who seem to use some type of holographic technology to present themselves, albeit very physically, but they explain, I'm not, really physically here. It almost seems to be some type of incredibly sophisticated remote viewing of some sort.
Have you heard of the term biohologramic?
I have not, but I love it.
You can just put it together. So they're conscious beings. They can actually send their omnipotent God self or soul to a physical location, and it manifests in a hologram. That's how it's biohologramic.
Okay.
So there is a point of origin wherever the physical being is. And a lot of these are even extra dimensionals, which means they are a conscious being. They're not necessarily a spirit from a dead body that has moved on, but they're actual conscious beings. They're either so evolved that they don't even have a physical body, or they're vibrating at such a high frequency that they don't even require a body.
Yeah.
But yes, I can see them in my home every so often.
I've noticed, John, and this is something I've actually been meaning to ask you for a long time, in working with experiencers, not all the time, but a lot of the time, I do feel presence of the being. Now, as you said, I may not physically see them, but I feel a kind of a heat, a kind of a speeding up of the molecules. And this is, in my experience, a little bit different than what one feels when you're talking about being around a discarnate entity who is maybe trying to manifest and is pulling, caloric heat energy out of the environment just to manifest. So you might get cold spots or coldness, which is not to do with evil, it's just is physics. is this something that you have also experienced? Do you feel a warmth or an electricity? I don't know how to explain it any better than that.
Absolutely. I absolutely do. And often it happens when I talk to individuals like yourself. I'll be doing a show and we're all experiencers for the most part. And some of the things that we say provokes energy. And, there is energy in prayer and in the spoken word. And when like minds come together and have a frequency between themselves, it creates energy in your physical location and in mine. And my house is also on a vortex because there was an Indian reservation here a few hundred years ago. Okay. So the upwelling of earth energy pours into and out of this vortex, which I call my house in Orlando. And it is the perfect conduit for these energies to present themselves and manifest themselves. And what happens to me a lot is I will come in contact with earthbounders. They've passed, they're trying to ascend to the light, they're too dense. They're too dense to ascend to the light, so they're stuck in limbo.
Yeah.
And they will literally come to me and come to my house and ask me to help them cross over.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's arch-aliens, I call them the arch-aliens, archangels, but there's one called Azrael. And arch-alien Azrael is there to help you cross over to the other side and come in contact with people that love you, family members that have passed before you, that are waiting for you on the other side. Now here's a complete and total trip. I went to a funeral in September of last year, somebody close to me that I'll leave nameless. I'm at the funeral and there's all these people around and I'm trying to pick up on this person who just passed. So I have to get away from everybody and go sit down at one of the pews. It was open casket, so I wanted to have an eye shot of this individual in the casket and start meditating and see if I could find his soul. And it didn't take long. I could see him floating above the casket. And he's telling me, he's like, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, please, I'm listening. I'm all ears. And then all I could hear was just a million voices. There was 400 people. This guy was a respected community leader, an icon in the church. Everybody loved him and revered him. So there was 400 people at his wake, and I could not get a clear channel. So I said, talk to me in the morning when there's nobody around. So I wake up first thing in the morning, and the first thing he says, I feel so stupid. And I'm like, why? Why would you feel stupid? He said, because my parents were on the other side there to escort me to the light and not what I thought heaven was. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by that? He said, I realized once I passed, because my parents explained to me, who were waiting for me on the other side, that all of the angels and all of the God references in the Bible referring to extraterrestrials. He told me that he felt stupid because he'd been praying to aliens his whole life and he didn't even know it. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense.
It blew my mind. And I said, you know what? God is what we make God. God is all about intention. Everybody conveniently forgets about the Old Testament. So let's focus on the New Testament. If you had a loving God in your life, and you followed your life after those principles outlined by Jesus Christ and by God, then it doesn't really matter, It doesn't matter. But one thing I also learned is that Yahweh, who was Enlil of the Anunnaki, created his own version of heaven and hell so that he can take possession of our souls when we pass on, and uses this soul recycling processing plant to further fuel his supernatural omnipotent energy. Which has been blowing my mind. And then recently, Yahweh, who is Enlil of the Anunnaki, he told me, he said, I must wean Mother Earth off of my figurative bosom, because the more that they rely and depend on me as their God, the more it pulls me down to the earth plane and stops and thwarts my ascension towards the universal godlight. So Yahweh, who is Enlil of the Anunnaki, told me that he is this close to letting go of his fake versions of heaven and hell so that he can become one with the universal God consciousness. The higher gods rule the heavens, the lower gods rule the planets in the underworld. and he wants to move on beyond deceiving we humans into thinking that he's God, because now it's making him weak, where in the past it made him strong. And imagine him doing this, extrapolate that. He's been doing this on thousands of planets around the Milky Way, Andromeda, our neighboring galaxy, the universe, and the multiverse, since there is more than one universe. And where this made him strong before, this is now making Enlil weak, because he wants to ascend to the status of being the higher gods, bossing the lower gods around, telling them how to rule the planets and the underworld.
Well, he's still so. Enlil is, despite his incredible skill and manipulative abilities and all this, he's still an ego-based being. He's still the same ego-based being that
Yes.
tried to manipulate Abraham into, sacrificing his son. He's, messing about with the poor citizens of the Old Testament. He's still up to his old shenanigans. He's almost like what the Japanese would call a hungry ghost. He seems to be inveigled by physicality rather than rising above it. And is he a truth teller? Do you feel that what he says resonates with truth, or do you think this is just one more manipulation?
I think that what he told me was true. I don't necessarily know that it was for the most positive and righteous intentions. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I mean, basically, he wants to rule the lower gods. How do you do that? You ascend away from we humans, and then you designate a god lower than you to do it, and do it his way also. He commands from up high on the high tower, tells the lower gods who rule the planets and the underworld how to rule humans, and then he wants to move on. But also what will happen in this process is, I'm hoping, is it ushers in disclosure. If anybody can take 10% of my book and believe any part of Yahweh, the biblical God, as an alien, my book is disclosure. It is. It totally is. And that's the hardest curve. I even wrote about it in the book. And I emailed you a copy earlier, Wes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I did it like within the last hour, so I'm sure you were busy. But anyway, you
That's
have a
perfect.
copy of it.
Thank you.
Please share it with anybody.
Share it with me, for God's sake.
Yeah, please,
Okay.
please share it. But my book is disclosure. There is monotheism. There is one God. There is one source. And when we can all come to terms with, Muslims, Hindus, I don't care what your religion is, Christians, Jews, etc. If we can all come to terms with the fact, just like Grant Cameron was saying in his presentation, that we all are one. We do all come from the same source and the same maker.
Yeah.
Religion is designed to divide us and make us fight.
Yeah,
And
indeed.
it was designed to a T,
Well, again, Enlil was not innocent in that matter.
No, it was his
and,
orchestration,
It was his whole, his belief in the original sin, as I understand it from the work of Sitchin, the original sin of
Sure.
of adding Anunnaki DNA to the hominids, and then having actual marriages and relationships take place between the indigenous people of the earth, if they were even indigenous. But you know what I'm talking about. Where is Enki in this? I feel a great. I have always felt a great sympathy and interest and sort of kinship with Enki, who tried so hard to make everything right repeatedly, and things kept happening that were out of his control. Has he transitioned into, after his life of thousands and thousands of years, his physical life, has he transitioned into a spiritual plane, or has he incarnated back into physicality?
That I can't exactly answer, but one thing I do know is that it's been prophesized in many biblical texts. There's 50 different versions of the King James Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Quran, a number of religious texts that span the world, that there would be a battle in the heavens between good and evil. And I do believe that that's happening right now as we speak. And that I believe that Enki, who I'm actually more close to. I wrote the book about Yahweh because I thought that was the more pertinent and important
Oh,
information to share
yes,
with the world.
very much
But
so.
Enki, I believe I'm like a disciple of.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of his followers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that he is my church.
Mm-hmm.
That he was the one who tried to get Enlil to not flood the earth.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he begged him, he implored him to not do so. But Enlil also, that this whole human creation event is it's really twisted. Enlil deliberately designed us so that they could interbreed with us. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's a huge point that people don't really think about, but
Mm-hmm.
you said it or alluded to it earlier.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He deliberately designed us humans so that the Anunnaki and other human looking extraterrestrials could interbreed with us and procreate with us also.
Yeah.
And this actually angered his father, Anu,
Oh, yeah.
who did not like it at all. But
Yeah.
he's the one who appointed, you know, his youngest son, Enlil, to be the ruler of the world, you
Yeah.
know, and this is what happened. You know, he created the fallen angels and then he banished them to earth. He had to know that they were going to have sex with humans. He
Mm-hmm.
had to know that, and create the Nephilim, you know.
Indeed. Indeed. So it was the conflict wages on, and Enki, you know, the work of Michael Tellinger is quite fascinating with regards to Enki, and of course now that the mass amounts of gold mines have literally been discovered uh, by Michael Tellinger, it only validates exactly what you're talking about. These were real events. These were real events. The Anunnaki were here, they were mining gold, we were upgraded, and there were, as you say, there were also other extraterrestrial beings from other places that are involved in our genome. It's not just Anunnaki DNA, but there are still many, many people on the planet carrying O negative blood, myself included, which is the last little sort of vestigial physical evidence that we have of the first blood grouping, the first humanoid blood grouping, O negative blood. 95% of the Basque people carry O negative blood. So there are pockets of it with people that are maybe more directly related to the ancient ones than others.
I concur. And a number of reptilians, when they use humans for sacrifice, they're looking for individuals like yourself because of your blood type, especially children,
Yeah,
which I hate to even think about.
yeah,
But
that's
they
a
do.
tough one.
They target those children with that particular blood type because it's extraterrestrial blood,
Yeah,
you know, and they want to perform the rituals and the sacrifices while the children are still alive because they're so scared it pumps their blood full of cortisol and stress hormones which taste good to them, and it's just horrifying to think about. But yeah, your blood is coveted throughout the universe, that's for sure.
wow.
You know
Carry on.
something, Reverend John? I want to go back to something you were saying earlier because it fascinates me.
Sure.
Um, I'm a follower of Robert Monroe, the sound engineer who created HemiSync and had a number of out-of-the-body experiences. And then he has had several people follow him. One of them said, Bruce Mullen, he said that we are never alone. And you spoke about this in terms of aliens earlier. And I've thought that for ages, that we're constantly under observation. And so I wanted to come to terms with that a few years ago and ask myself, is that cool? Do I have an ego in the way of that, or a pride or a shyness or anything else that would say, who's watching me right now? What are they seeing and what does it mean to them? So I wanted to sort of tap your knowledge base and say, how do you feel about that?
Number one, I agree with everything that you just said and the research that was based upon. Absolutely. One thing that I do is I literally pray and meditate on receiving contact from loving, light working, benevolent angels and aliens. I pray about it every day of my life. And I pray about it, and then once I prayed on it 100 times, I pray 100 more times about it. And after doing this for literally decades, it's starting to come to fruition more and more and more.
Yeah.
The older I get, it's happening at a more graduated clip of what's happening to me, the abductions, the sightings, visitors appearing in my home, the blue beings at the conference last year, who used the term Anunnaki, 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 Anunnaki to trip me into some kind of Jedi mind trick and make me forget to take pictures of these individuals.
Yes, 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 yes. Hopefully you'll expand on that experience again for us. I know you have, but it's an amazing experience.
It is. My next book is based on it, along with some other things, but my next book is The Blue Beings Visitation at the UFO Conference. And shortly after that whole thing happened, I heard Grant Cameron on a radio show with Audrey Starborn Hewins, and Grant never actually saw anything, but he heard all about it. He heard the whole story, and he said, based on what I'm hearing, I believe it. I believe it because, you know, I'm getting to look in these people's eyes and listen to them tell me this story. You know, I don't think they're making it up. Plus, there was over 20 witnesses to it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's completely believable, and I think there are often ET presences at the various conferences. I think it's very common
It is.
for various beings to show up. There are a lot of beings who look just like us. How would we know? But they, you know, they're there.
Well,
They are.
just in case, Reverend John, somebody didn't hear that story first time around, would you mind telling it again?
I could spend 2 hours telling it, but I'll try and do it as briefly as possible without leaving out any of the important parts. So Audrey Starborn Hewins, I met her and Ray Hernandez in September of 2014 during the Experiencer Speak 3 conference, and got to meet Audrey, open a dialogue with her, build a rapport with her, and she said, you know what, I want you to be the opening speaker at next year's conference. I want you to make it real spiritual. You know, I want us to be able to feel the vibe in the room because I know you can do that. And so I decided I'm going to do a seance. I'm going to do something very similar to what I do in my house when I'm all alone. So I had 79 experiencers hold hands and did a breathing regimen, cleared our chakras with a chimney sweep, okay? Surrounded ourselves individually with circles of godlight, and then surrounded us all collectively with one huge godlight. And then invited archangels or archaliens that I work with exclusively, Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Enoch, who's also known as Metatron, okay? And I said, before the end of this conference, somebody's going to see something unlike they have never seen before in their life, okay? And I'm putting my name on it and sticking my neck out there saying it. Well, I tell you what, the first day expired, nothing happened. The second day was almost completely finished, and Travis Walton was the last speaker. And something that morning got me up at 6 in the morning. I never wake up that early. I got up at 6 in the morning so that I could be right by the front door, because I wanted to be able to sell my book, and I wanted to have pole position on anybody that came in and out of the conference. So conferences, as you know, are typically running late. The speakers are so good, you know what I'm saying? Unless one just cancels, which does happen, they typically run late. Well, about a half an hour late, 4 people arrived, 2 of which had blue skin, and they walk up to me and say, "Are you the person we pay so that we can see Travis Walton?" And I said, "No, let me find Audrey." Well, I found Audrey's twin sister, who in turn found Audrey, and we had just dimmed the lights because Travis had come out with his new DVD entitled Travis, which was actually better than the movie Fire in the Sky, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and Travis hated it, but that's another story. So anyway, Audrey pulls them into the light so that she can see their money, because the lights were dim because we're about to watch the DVD. And it's funny, they're holding the money kind of like a deck of cards. They weren't holding it, you know, you would grasp your money, and, you know, they're holding it like this and didn't even know what notes that they even had. So Audrey's like, "Here, give me 4 of these." And it wasn't even enough money. It wasn't even enough money. Audrey's just like, "Okay, whatever. I'll take 4 of these and please go have a seat and enjoy Travis's presentation." And then, so they walk up to Travis, and Travis noticed that they were blue and almost said something. I don't know Travis, but according to Audrey, he can have kind of a sarcastic sense of humor. You know, "Hey, y'all feeling blue today?" or something. But he didn't say anything. Now, one thing I must make perfectly clear is I never saw them approach Travis, and Travis doesn't want to talk about this, although a number of other witnesses have called him out. I didn't see it, but Audrey saw it. Audrey was the one who walked them up to Travis Walton. And I can see why he doesn't want to talk about it, because they'll thrust him right back into, all this spotlight.
Yeah.
And you can imagine what he'd have to go through again. And I think that's the reason he doesn't want to talk about it. But whatever, his name is being mentioned on record on these shows by not just me, but a bunch of other people that were at the conference. So anyway, we watched the whole DVD and then a question and answer time period. And at this point, I didn't even realize that two of these people had blue skin. But then as soon as the conference was over, they walked right up to me. They walked right up to me and started talking to me. There was four of them. Two of them had blue skin. I'll call Don the grandfather. He looked about 65, 70 years old. He had a hat on, glasses, very, very blue skin, flannel shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Then there was another one, blue skin, who was tall, Aryan looking, good looking, blonde hair parted on the side, probably 6'1", 6'2", and thin. He had blue skin also. Then there was a short one that was maybe 5 foot, no hair on his face, no hair on his body, cut off white t-shirt, jeans, and moccasins. He kind of looked like a biker dude, and had these real tight fitting sunglasses on inside, and had them on during the DVD, okay, and then had a Fu Manchu coming out of his chin, no other facial hair. And I told this to my editor publicist, Karen Christine Patrick, and she said, I bet you he's a Martian, so let's just call him the Martian dude. I'm like, okay, fine, we'll stick with the Martian dude. And then there was another one that looked just like Jason Martell.
Oh.
Do you know who Jason Martell is?
Yes.
And it's
Are you sure it wasn't Jason Martell?
He looked just like Jason Martell,
His little
tall,
hair.
same coloring, same hair, except his eyes were curiously huge. His eye orbits were abnormally large and black. There was void of color. He had no whites in his eyes. Now that's the one who came up to me and said, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki, the Anunnaki. Kind of like autism, like it was almost like he was autistic the way he said it, like the Star Children will do. They know short sentences and they sound almost robotic when they try and communicate with people, and they often want to be invited into your home, kind of like if you invite the vampire in, you rendered yourself powerless. Anyway, but then I was watching this thing on the CIA brainwashing people, and this hypnotherapist was talking about often there's trigger mechanisms that can turn somebody into a Manchurian candidate by a tone, a frequency, or in this case, it was a woman with a polka dotted dress. And when the targeted individual saw this woman with the polka dotted dress, he immediately went into this episode where he completely blacked out and went on this mission that was programmed in his mind. And I'm like, wow, that made so complete and total sense. Because somebody else said that to me also, that they thought it was a trigger mechanism to set off that Jedi mind trick on over 20 of us. So one thing that happened to Audrey is that at one point she walked away and never came back. If you saw two blue beings at your UFO conference, how do you not go back afterwards and at least get a better look? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everybody sat down and listened to Travis, because that's what you're supposed to do even if you see aliens. You sit down and you respectfully listen to this perhaps the most famous abductee in world history. And to me, I'm thinking, and I wrote this in my book, why did Audrey not come back and get a better look at him? And she even acknowledged on that first show with Grant Cameron that she kind of just forgot what happened after that. And they did this to all of us. They didn't have a device in their hand, implying some kind of technology. I think that it was done cerebrally and mentally with mental capabilities that we may have, but they're latent. And we don't know how to enable them to surface, although I'm slowly learning how to do what I call pop my alien memory cap, which is a term I coined a long time ago, which is in my book. And also another term I coined is alien anesthesia. So I believe that the second they walked in the room, they started to fill the room with some kind of frequency or something to throw us all off. There was another eyewitness named Ron Sharfy, and he's an IT guy for a living, and he was doing video and videography on most of the conference. He forgot to get his video camera when he was an eyewitness to them standing maybe 10 feet in front of him.
Yeah,
Oh, my.
yeah.
And Ron and I talked about this, and a number of us talked about how could we possibly forget to just break out our smartphone and take a picture? How, you know, I mean,
Yeah. Well, this
so
is all, completely really possible, and even what you're talking about within the realm of hypnotherapy. Even myself, I can hypnotize a room of people. No limit to how many people
okay.
can be hypnotized, and certainly triggers, anchors, all these things that you're talking about can, as you say, incite people to leave a room or come into a room or forget something. I'm not sure if we can be manipulated in that way against our moral ethical program. In other words, I think it stays kind of in the realm of the benign, because after all, even hypnosis is simply talking to our subconscious mind, which is part and parcel of our ethical self. So, I'm not sure if we can be manipulated to do something against our program, our belief system of what's right and wrong. But certainly what you're talking about is well within the believability of simply the technique of hypnotherapy. Good hypnotists can hypnotize unlimited amounts of people at one time. They can. So that's kind of, I think, what occurred. It completely sounds plausible, and it's also not the first time that I've heard this kind of thing, Reverend John. About an encounter with a physicalized, unusual being, and you don't know why. Well, why didn't I take a picture? Why didn't I bring my friend over to say hello? Why didn't I ask more questions? And this fog-like thing is something that I do hear about.
We have a friend, Reverend John, that pops his cap every day that he goes out for a smoke. This
Yes.
guy. This guy is so hilarious. He has got so much footage of UFOs, so many photos of UFOs. He is a UFO magnet. Now, he hasn't had a lot of close encounters, but
That he remembers,
that he remembers.
except for some dramatic ones as a young man. But
Right.
but as Wes said, he's a beacon.
Yes.
All he has to do is go out on the deck at work. Wherever he works, he's always stepping outside for a smoke.
That's it.
And every time that he does, and he captures these things.
All the time.
And his name is Paul Shishes, and there is absolutely no one else, I think, who has as much documented craft sightings as this gentleman does. Now, are they showing that? You have to wonder what's going on here. First of all, who is showing themselves to him? Are they benevolent? I believe they are. Why are they showing themselves to him? Because does he have a super sensitivity? Does he actually have some other spectrum that he sees that not everyone has? I'm not sure, but yet he gets photographic evidence, and I think much more with digital equipment than he
Yes.
probably ever did with traditional photography back in the day.
Multiple witnesses, multiple locations, multiple times.
Doesn't matter where he is.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to matter. Of course, why would it, right?
No, especially if you are that beacon.
Yeah.
And I was saying earlier, if they know that you can see them, it draws them to you even more.
Yeah.
You know, they love the fact that, I mean, there could be a number of people maybe even right next to him who may not be able to see. But one thing I've learned how to do is to look into infrared and ultraviolet light spectrums, which is often used as cloaking devices, hiding in plain sight. Often they're just, maybe 500 yards away from my house in the middle of the city. But if they show up and show themselves, how many thousands of people are going to see them? So I can be outside, and what I look for is bending of light, kind of like in the movie Predator.
Yes,
Oh,
You know,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
it used the environment as its camouflage and in effect bent the light. And they're working on technology like that right now. Actually, they perfected it a long time
A
ago,
long
but they're
time ago,
acting
yeah.
like it's just coming out now. Where they literally, you can look at something and the light is bent all the way around this object. And thus you end up looking right through it.
Right,
Even though you're not looking through it, you're
right.
looking at the bent light. But that's what I see in the sky and in my house or wherever I'm at. Sometimes it just happens. Other times I have to try and make it happen. If I focus enough on it, I can make it happen. I can do what I call manifest the orb. Can you see what I'm doing right now?
Yeah.
Focus on a very nondescript point, like on your wall or your ceiling. No artwork, no fancy colors, nothing that would make you think of anything except nothing, except for manifesting the orb. And then I traverse my body, mind, spirit to look into these infrared and ultraviolet light spectrums, and then I can see craft there,
Wow.
right there in plain sight.
Yes.
And I said this to a lady named Lynn Hartram, who would be a great interview one day for you if you're ever interested. But she works for Dr. Edgar Mitchell's Free. She works with the peer program where she has all these peers that talk to abductees and experiencers. They're not counselors, they're there to talk and to listen. And I'm one also.
Oh,
Okay.
wonderful,
And it's,
wonderful.
right up front, we are not counselors. We don't have PhDs and, this or that. We are here to listen to you. But anyway, I told her about this and she said, you know what? I went and got an infrared camera and I got a picture of a UFO. And guess what? It was the same UFO, at least by description, that I saw 3 days earlier. And the difference was this one stayed stationary, I don't know, maybe a mile from my house up in the sky for hours. So I use points of light as points of reference, stars,
Yes.
satellites, anything like that, against the tree line, anything where I can, because I'm trying to science it all away before I come to a conclusion that I saw a UFO. This red dot stayed in the exact same spot for like 4 or 5 hours. I told Lynn Hartram about this. The same thing, at least by description, followed her and her daughter 20 minutes outside of Boston to her home in Boston. And she took a picture of it. And I actually used that picture on my presentation where Blue Beam showed up.
Oh,
And
wow.
I just thought that was completely and totally fascinating. That I bring this up to her, explain to her what I saw, and then she had a video of basically the same thing.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
really incredible.
So, assuming, John, that there's something in that craft, let's just say, or behind that craft, or powering that craft, then that begs the question, why did they follow her? Why did you see it?
At the conference, she and I sat next to each other, and she actually saw the blue beings also. Okay. We talked about how we had been visited by almost infant-like grays. And she's like, you are the first person who has said that they have experienced any kind of infant-like extraterrestrial ever in my life. You're the only person who has said that. And I said, well, just recently, I've received from all kinds of different beings, all kinds of different species of beings. But for this particular flap that went on in my life for maybe 6 months, they were almost infant-like. They appeared infant-like, although they were highly ascended masters, I could tell, But this one would come and sit in my lap. It was very strange.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
incredibly
my
strange.
goodness.
And she told me the same thing, that she had the same visitors, and she said that there are Arcturians.
Wow. John, I have heard this same kind of recounting, but only once. And the gentleman, the experiencer,
Right.
was he is a highly tenured university professor, and had a couple of sort of Betty and Barney Hill-like experiences as a child, where he and his entire family were, driving home in the middle of the night, the car pulls over, et cetera, et cetera. But he was the only person I've ever worked with who talked about these beings that you're now mentioning. And he talked about how affectionate they were, and he could just hold out his hand, and they would come and hold his hand. And actually, in his work with me, he was able to become less fearful or not fearful at all. He released any of that fear and then began having more regular experiences with these beings. But he said they were like babies, like little infants. And I had never heard that before. I actually have never mentioned this to anyone because I thought, well, I'm not sure it was legitimate because it's so unusual compared to what I have heard. But how interesting is that?
Well, now you've heard it from two different people.
Yes, my
And Lynn
goodness.
Bartram would tell you the same thing also.
Yeah,
So, yeah, you know, the more you talk, the more this experiencer world gets smaller.
yeah,
And the more we have common stories when we think that we may be the only one experiencing what we're encountering.
Yes, yes.
People, and you listen to shows like yourself, and there's so many really good shows out there, you know, where we were the minority, we're the unspoken minority. You know, our voice is getting louder and louder. We're sticking out our collective necks so that
yeah,
others will do so and not be so fearful.
yes,
Because I'm still afraid to go on Facebook because I cannot be Reverend John Polk on Facebook. I have to be John Polk. And if I do that, I'm going to lose all of my entertainment contracts at the attractions here in Orlando.
yeah,
Now, my editor publicist, Karen Christine Patrick, she keeps telling me the more you talk about it, one day you're going to get exposed. And I said, that's fine. When that day happens, then I will be all over Facebook, plastering Yahweh, the biblical God, as an alien, you know, and all my bosses will fire me. Uh,
well, when you're ready to do that, you'll probably be ready to be fired.
yes, and that's what I told her.
Yeah.
That day will come, the bridge will present itself, and I will walk across that bridge with all experiencers at the same time,
Yes.
and
Wonderful.
we'll all do it together.
Yeah.
Wonderful,
That's what's
wonderful.
happening. Now, John, do you think that you incarnated in other lifetimes as perhaps another type of being on another planet? Do you think that you've had experiences in that way?
Absolutely. Now let's get real deep. I believe in concentric lifetimes. My God self or my soul is omnipotent. It's the part of the universal God consciousness that it's not even He, that is lent to me for this particular incarnation in this lifetime. But since it is omnipotent, that means it exists in all dimensions simultaneously. So since it does exist in all dimensions simultaneously, so do I. So in another concentric dimension existence lifetime, I might be a bird, or I might be a body of water, or I might be a tree, or I might be an extraterrestrial.
Right.
So it's going on concurrently right now. And often the ones that I believe are visiting me are actually me visiting me.
Interesting. Yes.
Because it's in my higher self's better interest to nurture me and make sure I don't do anything stupid or out of line, out of context, at the wrong time. You know, timing is everything. You know, this whole thing with the blue beings, the reason it hasn't gone viral yet, because it wasn't supposed to go viral yet. But it will go viral one day. And I'm thinking and hoping it will happen before the end of this year, but definitely by the end of next year. So, yes, we all have a higher alien self, which you can read about in my book.
Indeed. Well, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And of course, time is not actually linear. That's just our agreement so that we can show up places that we're supposed to show up and accomplish things together. But it is far different than that. Space-time is non-linear. And you exactly as you said, I really believe what you said to be true. And certainly, you know, as someone who does a lot of past life regressions in addition to working with experiencers, that is endlessly fascinating. And certainly, you know, I was going to just speak about the space-time thing a little bit and mention that Daryl Anka, who of course channels Bashar, the Sasani being, in his explanation of their relationship, he believes that he actually is an incarnation of Bashar 300 years in the future, something like that. He is the future Bashar. So by talking to Bashar, he's talking to an aspect of himself, and yet a being that maintains its own identity. in that sense. So I guess it's confusing. We have to start to think in nonlinear quantum ways to try to understand these things. But why not? There's a part of us, as you say, that is interdimensional, ultradimensional, and part of the creative force of the universe that doesn't descend into physicality. Is that
Yeah.
is that a fair assumption of what you were saying? Is that
Yeah, it's perfect.
mm-hmm.
I mean, perfect
So,
way to explain what I just said.
so Reverend John, not to interrupt the flow, we're looking at the last 2 or 3 minutes of this particular show.
Oh no!
Yes.
Talk
I
about
know.
space-time. I could use a lot more of it. Well, Reverend John Polk, we just have to thank you for joining us and being so open and doing all the wonderful work that you do. Now, if folks want to get a hold of you, or if they would like to order your book, Yahweh, how would they do that?
Okay, Yahweh, the biblical God, is an alien. You can order it via ebook and paperback by going to my website, johnpolkmedia.com.
Okay.
JOHNPOLK, johnpolkmedia.com.
Wonderful.
All right.
Wonderful.
And you can also contact me via email, jpolk2@cfl.rr.com, or on Twitter @Reverend Polk.
All right.
Lots of
And
different ways to get a hold of you.
Well,
yeah,
thank you again, Reverend John Polk, and we look forward to chatting with you again. Oh, all right.
I'm
Okay.
doing my
Okay.
pendulum tricks before we go. It's kind of hard to see, but I got two of them,
Wow. No, we
and
got
they're
it.
they're different sizes and different weights. And this is where my buddies will hold my arms and go, "You're spinning it, you're spinning it," and then I do some other things like, "How are you doing that?"
Wow, that's amazing, eh?
That's incredible.
Oh, I've got to make sure when I edit this video, this last little bit stays in.
Absolutely.
Wow,
I
thank
know
you
you.
for that.
I know you got to.
Well,
Thank you so
Reverend
much.
John, you just keep on swinging, man. You just keep on swinging and doing what you're doing, and we are so thrilled to know you and have been able to talk to you, and I can't wait till we actually meet in person. I know
Yes.
it's going to happen very soon. I know it's going to happen this year.
Okay, thank you so much for having me on the show.
You're
All
very
right.
welcome. Stay on the line after we stop the recording because we want to chat with you just for a minute, okay?
Okay.
Sounds
Thank
great.
you, everyone out there in Contact TV land. This is Leslie Mitchell-Clark,
And Wes Roberts.
and we're going to wish you a very good night. And remember, we are not alone.
Good night.
Good night from Contact.